My name is Hani Faris. I'm serving as a chairperson for this program. Friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this program is the product of a collaborative effort between Trans-Arab Research Institute, TARI, a think tank founded in 1999 and registered in Boston, Massachusetts, and Arabic Hour, founded in 1981 as a TV program on local channels and is presently a YouTube program. The two organizations offer objective analysis on topics relevant to Arab Americans and Arab Canadian communities, as well as cultural, economic, and political issues in Arab countries. Regarding our topic today, the 1948 United Nations definition of genocide lists 5 acts that indicate a genocide. Mass killing and serious bodily and mental harm are 2 of the 5 acts. Another 2 acts are interrupting the biological continuity of a group. The 5th act is destroying the environment that sustains living conditions of a group. This includes destruction of buildings, social infrastructure, water systems, sewage, power grids, agriculture, and hospitals. The intent behind these acts is to commit a genocide. Did Israeli acts in the first 2 years of its war on Gaza indicate an intent to commit a genocide? Is that still going on in the last 6 months after the ceasefire was declared? In this program, we will focus on the condition of the Gaza medical system to answer the question. Our speaker today is Dr. Tarek Loubani. Tarek is a medical doctor of Palestinian descent and a citizen of Canada. Born in Kuwait, his family immigrated to Canada when he was 9 years old. He studied medicine at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, did his residency in family medicine at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, and completed an emergency medical residency at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. After graduation, Tarek joined in 2010 the University of Western Ontario as assistant professor and later as associate professor in the School of Medicine. Tarek has been a humanist and activist all his adult life. In 2018, he traveled to Gaza to help treat young Palestinian boys and girls being shot by Israeli soldiers for protesting at the border of Israel with the Gaza Strip. On the 14th of May, while delivering emergency medicine to an injured protester, an Israeli sniper shot him in the leg and the knee. On that day, 19 medical professionals were intentionally shot by Israeli snipers. The Prime Minister of Canada met with him on his return to Canada and threatened to take the case to the United Nations Security Council. Since, Dr. Loubani never stopped defending the right of Palestinians to freedom and independence. Emergency medicine has been his tool to fight the Israeli occupation. He is with us today, and he is speaking to us from Gaza. Our second discussant is Dr. Salah Bibi. Dr. Salah was born in Jaffa, Palestine, and along with his family, he was forcibly expelled during the 48 Nakba. He graduated from the American University of Beirut with degrees in biology and medicine. During his 3-year medical residency, he was volunteering to care for patients in Palestinian refugee camps and in underserved Lebanese areas. Dr. Bibi did his specialization in infectious diseases in Wisconsin-Salem, North Carolina. For the next 40 years, Salah practiced infectious disease medicine at Gold Medical Foundation in Modesto, California. He was active in the Arab American community, both state and nationwide. He served on the board of directors of the Association of the Arab American University Graduates. Dr. Rabab Ward. Rabab is a Lebanese-Canadian citizen and a professor of electrical engineering at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. She was the second woman to earn a doctoral degree in electrical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley in 1972, and the first woman to be appointed a professor of electrical and computer engineering in Canada in 1981. Rabab is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and the Canadian Academy of Engineering. She is an international member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering and the European Academy of Arts and Sciences. Rabab played a major role in establishing the Canadian Society for Women in Science and Technology. Myself, I'm a professor of political science and have served in the faculty of various academic institutions, including the Department of Political Science and the Faculty of Graduate Studies at Kuwait University, the School of International Service at the American University in Washington, D.C., the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, the Department of Political Science and the Institute of Islamic Studies at McGill University, the History Department at Simon Fraser University, and the Department of Political Science and the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, British Columbia. My colleagues will be the discussants, and we will be addressing our questions and comments to Tarek. Tarek, with his knowledge of Palestinian issues and the field in Gaza, is probably one of the best available people who can tell us about what took place and what's taking place at present. Salah, I'd like to ask you, if possible, to start on the first theme of the discussion.
Sure. Obviously, there is a situation on the ground now, but what we would like to know from you, prior to the October 2023, what is the situation of the medical community in Gaza?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, doctors. And basically, just in terms of the situation here, to give you orientation of my insight into it, I've been coming to Gaza since, I guess the first time would have been in 2002, and continuously since 2010. So it's been a long time that I've been engaged in the community here, and a long time that I've been in the hospitals here. Of course, the situation here is terrible right now. There's no question about it. However, before the war, any reasonable observer would have described the situation in the medical system as catastrophic. For starters, there was a blockade that had started right from the beginning, the first day of the interaction of the Israelis and the Palestinians, and had continued and intensified by the year and by the decades since, with the latest, most recent intensification being in 2006. And since that time, so in 2006, when the latest intensification began, at that point, nothing was allowed in. And even though the Israelis pretended and claimed that the medical system was exempt, what we saw practically and on the ground was that it absolutely was not. For example, routine antibiotics were absent. Analgesia was absent. I would have to sew children, for example, do sutures because I'm in the emergency, or do minor medical procedures like returning fractures and so on, without any anesthetics for kids. And of course, for adults, there's no anesthetics available too. So, and when we did have medication, they were often many, many, many years old. For example, when you put somebody to sleep because they're very, very sick and you need them to be on artificial mechanical ventilation, we usually use this suite of medications that are quite safe and pretty reliable. Instead, I was forced to use medications that were from the 70s. Even the people who taught me barely knew them. I would reach out to them and say, hey, do you remember using this medication? I said, maybe at the beginning of my residency. Medications like one called thiopental, which no reasonable doctor is using in regular practice. And yet in Gaza before the war was the main common medication that we used for this thing called induction. So before the war, the situation was catastrophic. And the only reason why we would say otherwise right now is that it's even more catastrophic now, because instead of having 40% stock out, that's the term that we use for medications that are at 0%. The World Health Organization has a list called the Essential Medication List. And before the war, 40 to 45% of all the medications that we needed off of that essential list were stocked out. These are not luxury medications. These are, as the name, essential medications. And the medical devices and equipment were so unavailable that even basic kinds of care that we needed to give, like fixating fractures or doing certain surgical procedures, we just couldn't do it. To the extent where my organization, GLIA, started manufacturing locally medical equipment. That's great. I love that GLIA does that. But why did we start doing that? We did that because it was impossible to acquire these kinds of medical devices, simple life-saving medical devices, like a simple stethoscope, that you would imagine no sane human being would ever block from entry into Gaza, and yet the Israelis blocked it. Things like beds. I'm just talking about regular devices. We tried to buy some beds, bring them in. The Israelis held them at Ashdod outside until they were rotten and molding. So before the war ever began, the situation was a total disaster. It was unacceptable and unbelievable.
Specific number here. How many hospitals were there, let's say in 2010, 2009?
The hospital number was about 36. There were 14 hospitals that were in the public sector. These were the ones that most people would hear about as the big hospitals. For example, Shifa is a public sector hospital. Nasser is a public sector hospital. Kamal Adwan had just shifted from public sector to military medical services. Indonesian is a public sector hospital. So there were 14 in the public sector, of which 10, I would say, are like reasonably sized, and of which 4 were the main ones in terms of operations. So Indonesian in the north, Shifa, and then in the middle area, it would have probably been Al-Shada Al-Aqsa, which is still around, the Nasser and European General Hospital. So those are the main ones, but about 14 public. So 36 total.
36 hospitals. What is the number today?
It depends how you want to count. The way that most of us count, we count 3. But realistically, it's probably half to 1. So what do I mean by 3? There are 3 hospitals with the lights on where you can actually go and receive medical care. One of them is Shifa, which used to be over a dozen buildings and is now reduced to 1 building, where that's where I used to work. The emergency department is no more. In fact, not just the emergency department, the entire building that I used to work in is no more. The building beside it is no more. So they now work out of the administrative building, what used to be the hospital, and operate the best that they can out of that. Then the other one is Shuhada Al-Aqsa. Shuhada Al-Aqsa used to be a very, very basic hospital and has been forced to be a hospital of full service. Nasser, again, was a very small hospital, a few beds, is now forced to serve over 1,500 emergency visits, hundreds of admitted beds, thousands of surgeries a year now when they don't have the capacity.
In civilized society, numbers mean a lot. Beds per 100,000. According to the US, we have 1,500 beds for every 100,000. What is the number over there? Obviously, it's astronomical ratio, don't you think?
It is. I don't know the exact number offhand, but it's not just number of beds. So, for example, Nasser maybe has a few hundred beds at this point. But what do those beds have and where are they? The majority of those beds are not what you and I would think of as beds. So, for example, if we were to go and visit an admitted patient who had just had a very major surgery, we'd most likely find them outside in a tent. Like right now behind me, I'm in a tent. GLIA, our organization, which is an international organization with all the resources in the world, we're in a tent because everything's destroyed. Everything is destroyed. If I were to go out here, look right, look left, everything is destroyed. It's all tents. So most of the beds are actually outside in tents. And then the beds that are inside are packed so tightly. Like in Canada, we have a term called hallway medicine because we didn't have enough beds, and so people started creeping into the hallways. Well, here that goes, double, triple, quadruple. Rooms that used to be overcrowded and hold 4 or 5 or 6 patients now hold 15 or 20. There are people in every part of every hallway. And those are patients, plus also the internally displaced people who are also in all of these hospitals and can't go back.
Tarek, can I ask a question, Salah? So basically, the Israelis, from day one, their war on Gaza, began destroying the hospitals. Why? What's the intent? What's the policy? Why would you destroy hospitals and en masse? Isn't this genocide? This is the definition of genocide, destruction of hospitals. And yet, you and their friends in the US support their position. No, this is not a genocide. What is it, in your opinion, and why? How do you explain this policy?
Yeah, I think it's very obvious that anybody who claims this isn't a genocide and this isn't a mass slaughter with ethnic cleansing is either, on the Israeli payroll or is supportive of the genocide and understands that term carries meaning and that term is toxic. This is clearly a genocide. And, you don't need to just take that from me. Reputable organizations like Palestinian Center for Human Rights and the Palestinian Red Crescent, lots of reputable organizations, human rights organizations, are saying the same thing. And that's because they are reflecting what is happening here. We can also look at the words of the Israelis. The Israelis haven't exactly been coy. They are saying that we want to destroy all of the Palestinians. They referred to us as Amalek, right from the start. I believe that was Netanyahu. But Netanyahu called us Amalek. Then there were other people around him who called us human animals and other things even worse. The goal from official Israeli society has always been the same: to eliminate all Palestinians and to make it so that they're no longer a factor. That's part of what the Israelis called the General's Plan. That's part of what they did in Rafah, which is the General's Plan was for the north of Gaza, part of what they did in Rafah, and part of what they're doing right now. So, for example, when I first came in to Gaza, we had to drive up an area called the Philadelphia Corridor, which is the southernmost point of Gaza. And I had traveled down this area many, many, many times because I used to come in through the Egyptian border when I first started coming. And everything was destroyed because you'd kind of look to the right, to the left was the Egyptian border, which I recognize. To the right, it was empty, nothing. Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of people were just a few months earlier, is wiped to the floor. I could see to Khan Yunis, which is like, for example, being able to see from downtown Toronto to the lake. That's even only 3 or 4 kilometers, whereas the distance from Rafah to Khan Yunis is 8.5 kilometers. So the Israelis have not hidden that their intent is ethnic cleansing and genocide. The Palestinians understand that. Their human rights organizations have called it that. And not that I care at all about them, but also the international organizations who have really offered no other help. And Israeli human rights organizations have also said the same thing. But again, I don't really care what they say. Our own experts and our own institutions have all called it and recognized it as such almost from day one.
What about this Dahya principle, which the Israelis talk about? Isn't that for the destruction of civilians? and their infrastructure?
I think, Tarek, what Rabab is referring to is the Dahya doctrine, which they applied to Gaza. And then when they applied to Gaza, they said, we're going to have the Dahya doctrine. And it started with Lebanon. So if you're aware of it, the Dahya doctrine is a principle which maybe you can tell us about it, Salah?
Well, I don't know much about it, but a certain military person wrote the white paper on it, so to speak, and he is deep in the government of Israel. His principle is that to destroy a society, you have to decapitate it by killing the professors, destroying the hospitals and the schools. And that has always been the case. It never was removed from it. I think his name is Eisenstadt or something like that.
Eisenkot. Yeah,
Eisenkot.
Yeah.
Gadi Eisenkot.
He wrote one where he said there should be the application of limitless violence, force against civilians and civilian structures. And I guess they not only applied it to Lebanon, they, of course, applied it to Gaza, which you refer to, buildings, structures. At present, I think anywhere between 80 and 90% of all structures in Gaza have been destroyed. They're leveled to the ground. Am I correct, Tarek?
Yeah. The level of destruction is truly unbelievable. Like, I mean, I was in Dahya after the 2006 war. I remember looking at Dahya and thinking, wow, I can't believe how thorough the destruction is. And really the next time that I saw that level of wide-scale destruction was in Gaza now. And that's not, like, remember, since 2006, there was a big war on Gaza in 2012, and I was here for the entirety of that war. There was a big war in 2014. Again, I was present for that war. There was a big war in 2021. So there were several big wars. And yet, really, the level of destruction that was like what happened in Dahya didn't hit until after October 23rd. So it's not because of a lack of depravity on the Israeli part before 2023. It's because of the intensity of what is happening here that we talk about that. The Israelis have gone properly insane at this point and are truly pursuing an all or nothing strategy. And they will not stop until every Palestinian is dead. It took me way too long to understand that was the intent, because I thought, well, no, maybe they're exaggerating. Maybe Netanyahu's just talking. Maybe, the human animals thing is just a figure of speech. But every indication is that the actions on the ground match the level of rhetoric that's happening.
Can you tell us something about the medical staff, the medical equipment, and the ambulances and paramedics? What about these three items?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Can you repeat the ambulances, the paramedics, and
medical staff, doctors, and medical equipment?
Yeah, the medical staff has been decimated, I think, like by the literal definition. Over 1,500, the last time that I took a look, have been killed, straight out killed. And hundreds, if not thousands more, are in jail. We really don't know.
Are you talking
about doctors, nurses, healthcare personnel.
Okay.
Not just doctors, healthcare personnel. Doctors, nurses, paramedics. And so we're really talking about such a large number of healthcare personnel who have been just straight out killed. And lots of the killing was, of course, chaotic and random, but lots of it was specific and targeted. For example, I'm in my mid-40s. I'm basically mid-career right now. And people at my level are the people who usually are the chiefs of departments. We run programs. There's an educational program that I'm involved in right now where we're teaching medical students and residents. Well, that program before the war was run by somebody who's mid-career. Those people are all dead. The chief of emergency of Shifa, a close personal friend of mine, is dead. And They were all killed in targeted strikes. The head of the medical school was killed in a targeted strike. The chiefs of department were killed in targeted strikes. So the Israelis were very, very keen to kill all of the people who were in leadership positions in medicine and have left behind people with very little experience who have been forced to step up into shoes that they were not ready for. I can't believe how well they've done. Similarly, on the other hand, there have been some people who are older who've been spared, and they've taken leadership positions after, aging out of them or retiring out of them. There are many doctors who were retired and had to come back into service because they weren't killed. So the medical staff has been destroyed. The paramedics, civil defense paramedics have been dying at a rate that I can't even believe, I don't think there's a single family that doesn't have a family member in the civil defense who's been killed. And same with the paramedic services like the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. This is not even talking about the fighters who've been killed. I'm talking about the people who are, properly civilian who've been killed. And then in terms of the equipment, well, the equipment has been a source of targeting too, in two ways. One, it's been bombed from the air. Nasser Hospital, in which I work, has been bombed, a dozen, 2 dozen times, in addition to being overrun and taken over by the Israelis. It's been bombed multiple times, including while I've been there. It's been bombed. And on top of that, the Israelis have rampaged through every single hospital in Gaza, with the sole exception of the Al-Aqsa hospital. That's the only hospital that they haven't rampaged through. But other than that, they've been through hospitals. When they came through Nasser Hospital, they put bullets through almost every piece of medical equipment. They trashed the CAT scanner that was there. They stole the pieces of equipment that were there.
I have a question about public health, other than the hospital, when the injury happens or sickness happens. Can you talk about the subject of food, water, freedom of movement, and mental health issues?
Each of those is like an hour-long topic. Okay, I'll try to sum them up as best as I can.
Are there? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Big topics.
Dr. Tarek, what about your own experience? People want to know, like what did you eat during the time when the babies had no food and people had no food? What did you give to the babies? What did you eat? What were you given to eat? Many people were asking me, like these doctors who go there, what happens to them? How can they survive? Maybe you can start by your own experience.
The war has been marked by several famines, and people talk about them as, the first famine, the second famine, the third famine. And these famines have all been marked by specific kinds of depravity. For example, in the first famine, which was largely the north of Gaza, literally people had to be picking any leafy green or any piece of material that they could, grinding animal feed so that they could make themselves anything that they could. I was here for the second famine, which was marked by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, in which basically food was used as bait to bring as many young Palestinians to these sites as possible, where Israelis would then gun them down. During that particular famine, I myself lost about almost 50 kilos. It was 50 pounds, 25 kilos. It was such a crazy amount of hunger that was everywhere, that every single day I saw a patient who was dying from malnutrition. When there's that level of malnutrition, the patients who are around us, they start to do things that are weird and unexpected. For example, we would get people wounded who we had to send to surgery. Their surgical scars never healed. They would never heal. I saw patients who had a condition called scurvy, which none of my doctor colleague friends have ever seen, because we figured out the treatment for it in the 1800s, and we knew how to deal with it ever since then, even probably longer. And these malnutrition-based sorts of diseases showed up and emerged. in addition to people dying, there were so many people who had chronic diseases that were exacerbated. The nutrition was coupled with also terribly poor sanitation. The entire time that I was here for that particular trip, which was over 3 months, and we were incredibly hungry. I was constantly sick because, of course, no food. There's really no immune system that you can build with that. It's very, very difficult to do hardly anything. So the difficulties involved from the famine were severe and profound and crossed every single level.
Tarek, we discussed so far the civilian structures and the materials relating to the Gaza medical system during this war for the 2 years and then for the 6 months still that came after that. There is the other element, that of the civilians, and I'm going to leave it to Rabab to ask you the questions about civilians. Go ahead, Rabab.
Yes, thank you, Hani. Dr. Mel Bracknell, who was on television in October, late October, was saying that she was volunteering with Julia, and she's been to Gaza a few times, and she was talking about there's nothing, no soap, no gloves, no medication, no morphine, and this no sewage treatment, no electricity, no water, desalination plants. And she said the worst part, because she has been to Iraq and Ukraine and so many other places, but Gaza, nothing compares to Gaza, she was saying. Nothing compares to Gaza. And especially because nobody could flee, and there was no food, nothing. Also Dr. Rizwan Minhas, another Canadian doctor who was there, he was talking about a 5-year-old girl who was burned to her bones, and he just didn't know what, very sad stories. Dr. Diodri Noonan, also another orthopedic surgeon, where they hit her European Gaza hospital just after she left, and when she was there, also the 2 other hospitals in March. So it is just like how can these women, how can these children cope with that situation? How are they doing now? What is happening now after these unbelievable things? I can't even talk about them. Happened. How are people coping right now with all what has happened?
Yeah, it's such an incredible story of Palestinian steadfastness, or sumud. The situation and the circumstances Palestinians are subjected to are unbelievable. And, I know very well, as you mentioned, Dr. Mel Bracknell came to Gaza in her latest visit with Glia, and we spoke quite a bit about what was going on there. I had just left when she had come. It's incredible from our perspective as outsiders when we see what Palestinians are going through, and we see the level of destruction. Just 2 days ago, I was sitting with one Palestinian doctor who was sitting in front of me with a smile that was so warm and inviting. And when I spoke with him, I found out that his son had died a martyr in the 2014 war. And then after that, and during the 2014 war, many other members of his family were, but everybody who remained from his family, including grandchildren, were killed during this war. And this man is now basically alone. And when I spoke with him, it wasn't that he didn't suffer. He suffered tremendously. He remembered them every single minute of every single day. And he spoke about them like they were still alive. Because, in a big way they are. What was so impressive to me was how he took their deaths and he channeled them into the will to resist. He channeled them into an insistence on living as normally as possible, because he understood that their killing was an attempt to destroy him, not just physically, as a Palestinian, but also emotionally and psychologically. The Israelis don't care if you're physically dead or mentally dead or spiritually dead. They just want you dead. And there are all these kinds of deaths. You know, collaboration, for example, with Israel is not physical death, but it's a kind of death. You know, those people are no longer part of the problem for the Israelis. So ultimately, the situation, just as you had described with all of those people, like, of course, we all have a million stories. I can pour on you another million stories. It is a situation so terrible and beyond meaning. However, what's incredible is the Palestinian insistence on surviving. This is what one analyst calls regenerative deterrence, the idea that, you know, the Israelis were getting driven crazy because every time they'd come back, Palestinians had built tents on the rubble that they had left behind. They planted gardens on any little piece of soil. And I think that we have to match all of the terrible things that we see with a recognition that Palestinians are fighting with all of their soul and all of their being to try to survive as a nation and as a people. And God willing, you know, inshallah, they'll make it. But that never takes away from the fact that, you know, as the Arabs and the Palestinians say, the bill is high for Palestinian freedom, and it's paid in blood, in Palestinian blood. And, you know, the freedom that we fight for is not just Palestinian, it's for all of us, all of the people inside and outside.
Dr. Tarek, how is the health treatment and the medical treatment right now after, and is there food? Is there, like, it always bothered me about babies who needed milk and there was no baby milk. Can you tell us about these things and what's the situation right now?
Babies are still dying of malnutrition right now. Children, you know, I see children walking around, they have this thing called rickets, which is where their bones aren't growing in a healthy way, which is crazy. It's a malnutrition, it's a nutritional deficiency. And nutrition is not arriving into Gaza right now. There are calories arriving into Gaza. For example, if you want a piece of broccoli or a nice piece of meat, nearly impossible. Eggs, I haven't even seen eggs in a month. You know, and I consider myself lucky. During the real periods of starvation, there weren't eggs available for 6, 7, 8 months. So, you know, but I haven't seen even eggs in a month. Milk products, dairies, not available. You know, things that are highly nutritious are not available. If you want a can of, even now, if you want a can of Pringles, there's lots of Pringles in the market. If you want Nutella, there's Nutella. But this is deliberate on the part of the Israelis. It's not an unintentional, it's not that there's no demand for nutritious food. There's a huge demand for nutritious food. If you were to bring eggs in, you could sell them for exorbitant prices. The Israelis will not allow nutritious food in because they understand that they can kill us slowly. And when they allow things like Snickers bars or Nutella in, they can say to the world, which doesn't quite understand the Israeli mentality, look, they have Snickers bars. Like, obviously they're fine. Because in most societies, you have Snickers bars after you have broccoli. You don't bring in Snickers bars till you have your broccoli. Here, there's an absence of flour. There's an absence of rice. There's an absence of highly nutritious food. If it's green, we're probably not going to be able to get it. The only real vegetables that are available, so for example, today I had some tomatoes, and I was so happy. The tomatoes were obviously grown, not manufactured, in Palestine. Because Palestinian farmers are doing their best. They're planting everywhere that they possibly can, with every capability, including watering with salt water. You know, you eat it, you know that it's grown in Palestine because everything tastes a little bit salty. So right now the nutrition is absent. Similarly, medication is almost wholly absent. The situation with medications is not worse than it was before the war. It's the same. It was that bad before the war too. The difference now is that everything that's absent is needed 10 times more. For example, antibiotics are more needed. Gauze is more needed. And you know, gauze is another one. Gauze is a simple bandage that we should never run out of. You mentioned soap and gloves. These things we should never run out of, and yet they are completely absent too.
So Dr. Noonan was saying when she was there in April and in May that for her the worst part was water because she needed to. She's a surgeon or orthopedic surgeon, but she was also operating on adults and she was saying, you know, you have to wash the tools, you have to wash your hands, you have to drink, and she was describing that you just go and open and there's no water coming. And, you know, how is the water now? What is happening?
Yeah, the water situation is also unbearable. There's not enough clean water. There's not enough dirty water. You know, people here would shower with any water that's available. Even that's not available. So the desalination plants that exist have all generally been destroyed. The few that remain don't have spare parts. So even the ones that do remain, they don't have electricity. They don't have spare parts for generators. They don't have fuel for generators. You know, fuel here reached $40, $50 a liter. So we're talking about, and I'm not even talking about the very, very worst times when it reached even more than that. I'm talking about sustained periods where it was $40, $50 for weeks and months at a time. And sometimes it would spike even higher into the 70s and 80s dollars a liter. You can imagine in Canada or in the United States, if fuel goes to, you know, right now I think it just crossed $5 or $6 a gallon in the United States. And how unbelievable that is for most people, $2 a liter in Canada, how unbelievable that is for most people. And yet in Palestine, these numbers are just a fantasy. They just would not happen. And even if you want to buy the parts, you can't buy them at any price. So all of Palestinian society focuses its energy on keeping hospitals, desalination plants, schools alive. And yet there's not enough for any of these things. Right now, lubricating oil, you can't get it for any amount. It's not that you could pay $100 a liter for it or $200 a liter. You can't get it for any amount of money. And so systems are being overrun, overheated, and that means that all of this equipment is starting to fail or has already failed. So water is a huge crisis in a number of ways. The other way that it's a crisis is that many people are in tent cities now. And there could be one bathroom for 100 families or two bathrooms for, 100 families. And that is another part of the equation that's a disaster.
We talked a lot about the medical system. Do you mind, for the period of the war, the first 2 years of the war, can you tell us what the damage is on two particular sectors of society, children and women? Can you make some comments on that?
Yes, absolutely. We focus a lot on women and children because they exit the sort of racist discourse that exists in the West about the automatic culpability of men. So I want to talk about women and children, but I do want to first start by saying that the men in Palestinian society deserve life too, of course. And not only that, but the fighters in Palestinian society also are being treated in a way that is illegal. Palestinian fighters have the right to resist, and Palestinian armed resistance is their international right and as well as their national and humanitarian duty. And that's something that we see anytime that there's an occupation. The way in which Palestinian men are murdered is, of course, unacceptable. However, all of us will recognize there's something special, something particularly depraved and unique about murdering children, about murdering elderly, about murdering women. And also in terms of women, the levels of attack are on every level. For example, sexual humiliation, rape, which happens to so many Palestinian women, especially those in captivity. And these sorts of things are other ways of attacking, humiliating, and damaging Palestinians. However, I think none of us could ever argue that a Palestinian child is anything but a completely innocent civilian, which is why I was surprised when I would see it, especially the first trip that I was here about 6 months ago, when I would see Israeli snipers targeting little children. And when I say little children, I mean little children, sometimes children who had not yet started to walk, 8 months or 9 months, with a sniper wound to the head. And I remember asking the mother one time when I saw one of these children was trying to treat the child. I was upset and confused. And I said to her, like, were you around shooting? No. Is it possible that it was a stray bullet? She said, no. We could see the Israeli sniper posts and they could see us. And it's not that she wanted to be close to them. It's that she had to pass by them. And in so passing, they chose the target, the child in her arms, and they fired. And I remember thinking to myself, just as an act of basic human survival, I was in denial. I couldn't believe a human being could do this to another human being. And then I saw another one, and another one, and another one. I saw 1-year-olds. I saw 2-year-olds. I saw 3-year-olds. There is no age of child that I didn't see with a bullet in their head during my time in Palestine. And of course, they are kids. All of us were kids at one point. Many of us have had kids. And you recognize a special kind of innocence. For example, a 4-year-old who I had seen not too long ago, who was burned 100% because the Israelis threw an incendiary bomb on his family's tent, and the whole family had been burned. And he was there with these 100% burns, and all I could make out of him, from him, as a human being, was his mouth, which was open. You know, his eyes were melted shut. His ears were basically melted off. And he was just sort of crying out, Baba, 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 you know. You see that. Of course, that child and many of these other children I talk about died. You see that, and you start to understand the intentionality of the Israeli attacks on Palestinians. When they kill our children, that is part of the effort to destroy us. It's part of the effort to psychologically devastate us. And it is psychologically devastating. It does destroy a little piece of us. No one of us can hold a child while they die, or their limp bodies after they die while you walk them to the morgue, and not lose a little piece of you. You know, I've left so many little pieces of me in the morgue when I've taken these children to sort of be there. And the only reason that a doctor like me would ever take a little child to the morgue is because the whole rest of his or her family are dead. It's the only reason why somebody like me would ever carry a child to a morgue. We do lose little pieces of us. But I think also at the same time, we gain little pieces of the children who we see die this way. And to me, one of the pressing questions of this genocide is how we're going to be able to hold the memories of all of our dead. You know, all of them are such important pieces of us. They become the ground, the earth, the clay that is the womb of every Palestinian who comes after them. And we have to somehow remember them and hold them in the highest distinction and honor as people who have paid that price for our freedom.
Salah, do you have any questions on the issue or comments?
No, just one question. Have you ever talked to any of the people on the other side committing these crimes? Have you looked at them face to face and talked to them? What kind of people are they?
Yeah, Israelis and supporters of genocide are broken people. That goes without saying. The supporters of this genocide are not just Israelis, even though Israelis overwhelmingly support the genocide. You know, it's not just the Jewish community, even though basically every single major Jewish organization supports the genocide at some level. It's not even just sort of the West. This is a failure of all of humanity. And it's really just different levels of complicity. My Muslim brothers and sisters around the world, there are 2 billion of them. They are largely complicit. Not all of them, but many of them. There are basically only governments that can be counted on one hand that are providing meaningful support to Palestinians. Only a few, a handful. And these states are states that even many Arabs and Muslims will consider enemy states, you know? Listen to the discourse about Iran. Listen to the discourse about Lebanon, especially the Shia in Lebanon. Listen to the discourse about Yemen. We have, as humanity, stood with the wrong people in this genocide. We've stood with Israel. Most people on this planet have stood with Israel on this genocide. And I can see, and you know, the genocide didn't start in 2023. The genocide began having its climax in 2023. But it started a long time ago. And anything you can tell me about, you know, humanity's shift against Israel doesn't apply before 2023. No? We were rushing as Arabs and as Muslims to sign deals of normalization with Israel. So when I look in the face of the enemy is everybody who supports this genocide. And when obviously the tip of that spear is the Israelis. There's no doubt about it. They're the ones pulling the trigger. They're the ones who are so messed in the head that they look at Palestinian children and they see snakes and cockroaches. When I talk to them, I don't really detect that much dissonance. They look at me as the enemy. They look at me as the problem. They don't look at themselves and think, uh-oh, we've gone too far. I don't see that in the Israelis that I interact with. Even though, of course, I've been in jail in Israel, I think 5 times at this point. You know, I'm not really easily allowed to go back into Israel. So most of the Israelis I interact with are either in the diaspora or they're in the military. Because, of course, to come into Gaza, I have to be humiliated by the Israeli military multiple times. I have to be searched up and down. And you know what they're searching me for? They're searching me for medical equipment. They want to make sure that I don't even have a stethoscope that I bring in with me. They're searching me for medications. If I have a pill with me, they want to know that it's for me and not for a child in Palestine. That's what they're searching me for. The Israelis, I've not detected a internal turmoil when I've interacted with them on the borders. I've detected an internal peace. They're happy with what they're doing. They're supportive of what is happening. And I don't see that Israeli society is in any way against this. To me, what's more disturbing is people back home. You know, for example, even in my own university, I've faced tremendous sanctions at my university from my own dean of the School of Medicine because of my support for Palestinians and because of his insistence on not supporting Palestinians. The dean of a medical school in Canada refuses to recognize what's happening in Palestine as a war crime or as a genocide. And that's not just my dean, that's every dean in every department, in every university in Canada. So to me, complicity has passed. The time for complicity is over. I accepted complicity as a label and as a term for the people who did this, like, for example, my dean or people like this, 2 years ago. I'd say January 2024 is probably my mental turnover time. After that point, it was so clear what was happening that people exited the realm of complicity and they entered into active participation. And, you know, in Arabic, we call this war al-harb al-kashif, the war that exposed everyone. And one of the things it exposed is that our lives in the West were in so many ways a lie. That when they told us about human rights, they were lying. When they talked to us about international law, they were lying. And when it came time, they just admitted it. Said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to support Palestinians in this case, even if there's genocide. I'm just going to sit on this side right here. And that's when so much of the West exited complicity and entered into active participation.
A few years ago, you founded an organization in Canada called GILIA, G-L-I-A. And this organization has branches throughout Canada and in the US, and now in Gaza itself. can you tell us something about the policies and activities of GILEA? What is your status now? What is your condition? And how successful have you been, or how unsuccessful have you been? Could you tell us something about it?
Of course. And if people want to know more about the organization, they can look us up, glia.org. The organization GLIA started because I was involved in the war in 2012, and I couldn't get the very basics of my job to do my job. I couldn't even get a proper stethoscope so that I could do my job. And in medicine, stethoscope is 200 years old. To not have access to that is crazy. And what I understood then, GLIA's purpose wasn't initially to make medical devices or to try to depend on ourselves, because I went through the same journey so many of us did, of thinking that we could get the world to help. So I thought, medical devices, we can import them. Maybe nobody else has really thought about that. But what I realized over time, and what we realized as an organization over time, is that the only way in order to provide for Palestinians is to depend only on Palestinians in Palestine. So we shifted from a policy of trying to bring in equipment from outside to a policy of creating and manufacturing all equipment inside. And this policy, it extends to everything that we do. Self-reliance and self-dependence is the only way that we're going to be able to make it through this war. Like, for example, every single house is damaged in Gaza right now. There isn't a single house that's not damaged. And most of them, the vast majority of houses, are fully destroyed. The Israelis are not, insofar as it's within their hands, ever going to allow reconstruction equipment in. There's no circumstance in which they're going to allow that. And so we have to figure out how to rebuild on our own. With the medical system, it's the same thing. The rubble is a little bit less visible, but the medical system is going to have to build itself up. And so at GLIA, what we do is we support any project that brings up or builds capacity, not just capacity to educate and teach, which is commonly how many international organizations have operated, but also to create. For example, we were talking about nutrition. Well, there's this nutritional supplement that in Canada we might call Onshore. Basically, it's a shake that is protein fortified and has various supplements, vitamins and so on. The Israelis are never going to let that in. So we have to look around and figure out, well, how can we make that ourselves? We can either spend months and months trying to import, or we can spend months and months trying to manufacture. And the nice thing is, once you start manufacturing, you solve the problem for good, which is great. So our policy, we're what we call a medical solidarity organization. Our number one goal is to be in solidarity with Palestinians, to sit with them and to ask them, what do you want and how do you want to do it? And then to encourage everything that has to do with building capacity to manufacture, capacity to teach, capacity to participate. So for example, on the one hand, we were very short on scrubs. And other organizations, which did a good thing, they brought in scrubs from the outside. Good. What happens next? What GLIA did was we engaged with community partners, people who had textile companies from before the war, people who sewed, men, women, all of this. And we started manufacturing the materials and making the scrubs inside Gaza. So when we buy scrubs now, we're opening houses. We're creating opportunities for people to have a salary. There are other medical devices too. Actually, here's one that we're working on now. I present it not because it's the only or the more important, but because it's close by. This is a microscope that's 100% made inside Gaza. We started from a design that was available online called Open Flexure Microscope. And then we figured out what we would need to build it here. Where can we get the motors? Where can we get the electronic parts, the lenses? How can we salvage them? And so now, inshallah, it's going to be in testing. Inshallah, we're going to solve the problem of microscope shortages in Gaza. So this is how GLIA operates, and this is the way in which we think. At the end of the day, GLIA can't bring about liberation. All we can do is participate in Palestinian society, especially the health sector, while Palestinians bring about their own liberation and try to reduce the impact of the siege and of Israeli depravity.
But so you also manufacture in Canada, right? Or you mainly manufacture in Gaza? not sure.
Yeah, we manufacture everywhere where we are. The reason, so for example, we have a project in Poland where we manufacture for Ukraine, and also for Poland. We have a project in the United States. We have a project in Canada, of course. That's because the needs exist everywhere. Yeah. In Canada, we have our own kind of occupation in the First Nations areas, and their water situation is just like in Palestine. Their situation in terms of repression by the police, it's not exactly the same kind of genocide, but nobody can argue that the indigenous haven't been genocided in Canada. And so many of the conditions that exist in Palestine exist in places like Canada, in places like Latin America. And so we manufacture in many places indeed. But right now, I think it's fair to say that all of our attention is focusing on Palestine, because if you can solve the problem in Palestine, you solve it for everyone everywhere. We use a developmental philosophy called open source. And what that means is that everything we make becomes available for everybody else, not just to recreate, but also to enhance and improve. It goes by these 4 freedoms that exist within that community to ensure that everybody has access and ability to do what they need.
Such a big activity needs funding, and how is that done?
Thank you so much for thank you so much for that. Yes, and thank you, of course, to Tari for all of the contributions that you have made. We're running right now a clinic that takes care of wounds, and we try to manufacture things as well to use in that wound clinic. And that has been one of the activities that Tari has really supported. So yes, of course, all of this requires a lot of money. For example, the microscope here needs some additional research and development, which is expensive. We hire engineers here. We hire family members, like families here to make things happen. That's all expensive. And so if people want to donate and contribute, they can contribute at LaunchGood or at our website, or get in touch with us directly. We really need 3 things. The first and most important is liberation. If there's a liberation of Palestine, if the state of Israel is held accountable, then our work is easier, much, much easier. That's more valuable than any amount of money. We also need personnel. If your viewers include people who are expert in medicine, either doctors, nurses, or healthcare providers, we want them here. And then the third is, of course, funding, because at the end of the day, we need money so that we can buy things. We need money so we can pay people. That currency is a real lubricant as well. So if your viewers are able to participate in any of those 3 things, ahla wa sahla, we would love to have their help.
This is glia.org, right? How to donate, or
That's right.
how to get to know about Gilead.
Thank you so much.
Do you have any
Dr.
comments or questions? Dr. Salah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. No, this is a sign of hope.
Yeah. That's something that I would love to deliver to your audience. The goal against us is to destroy us in every way. And our hope is the most essential part of that. And, I'm not trying to be romantic about it. The families here who have lost everyone, the people here who are devastated by war injuries, they have a very different experience. And I think we all understand how devastated they are. At the same time, we only lose this war when we lose hope for a better future, for our own people, for a better future for our kids, a better future really for the whole world. And the Palestinians have led the way. And now, inshallah, the rest of people will follow. And what will result isn't just Palestinian liberation, but liberation for all of us.
Dr. Tarek, on behalf of my colleagues and our organization, Trans-Arab Research Institute, we want to thank you so much. God bless you. You've done a lot of work that not many actually are capable of doing. You've been a great character and very helpful to your society and your community. Thank you so much, and we hope to meet soon.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, we're all, as I've told you offline, we all got here because of the groundwork you guys laid for us. So thank you for everything that you've done to make it possible for people like me to do my work.
Thank you. God bless you.